My name is Christine Hughes, and I'm 34 years old. 12 years ago, when I was 7 months pregnant, my parents sat me down at their kitchen table and calmly informed me that I was no longer their daughter. There was no shouting, no dramatic fight, no tears from them. My father simply unfolded a piece of paper, read it like an official verdict, and told me that everything they owned, the house, the savings, every family asset they had spent decades building, would belong to my younger sister, Daniele. My name had been erased from every future they had imagined. They had already packed a garbage bag with my clothes before I even arrived. When the conversation ended, I picked up that bag, walked into the freezing rain, and stood alone at a bus stop with my unborn daughter moving inside me. I believed that was the day my family ended. I never imagined that 12 years later those same parents would stand on the porch of the house I built with my own hands and tell me they intended to move in. They believed I owed them everything. What they didn't know was that I had kept something hidden for 12 years. Inside an old shoebox was a truth powerful enough to destroy every lie my sister had spent over a decade creating. Before I tell you how they ended up on my doorstep asking for help, you need to understand the life I built after they threw me away. Every morning my alarm rings before sunrise. While the rest of Millbrook is still asleep, I unlock the back door of my bakery and breathe in the quiet smell of flour, butter, cinnamon, and cardamom. The oven slowly warms the room while I prepare dough that needs sours before it becomes fresh bread. Those peaceful mornings remind me how far I've come. 12 years ago I had nothing except fear and determination. Today I own a small bakery with 8 cozy tables, loyal customers, and shelves filled with pastries people line up to buy every weekend. It isn't the biggest business in town, but every inch of it belongs to me because I earn it one exhausting day at a time. My daughter Nora is 12 now. She grew up surrounded by the smell of fresh bread instead of bitterness. On weekends she stands behind the counter wearing an oversized apron, proudly helping our customers, making change, and recommending her favorite muffins as though she owns the place herself. Sometimes flour covers her lips and cheeks before lunchtime, and she laughs every time I brush it away. Looking at her reminds me why I never allowed hatred to consume me. She has never heard me speak badly about my parents. She knows they exist, but she has never carried the burden of my anger. I decided long ago that she deserved to inherit hope instead of resentment. Keeping that promise wasn't easy, but every sacrifice became worthwhile whenever I saw her smile. Last winter another dream finally became a reality. After 12 years of saving every extra dollar, I bought our first home. It isn't luxurious. It has only 2 bedrooms, a teeny porch that still needs fresh paint, and a kitchen used large enough for 2 people who love baking together. But every wall belongs to us. When I signed the final paperwork, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. Nora quietly reached across the table and squeezed my hand without saying a word. Somehow she understood what that signature meant. It wasn't simply buying a house. It was proving that no one could ever throw us out again. During our first week there, unopened boxes covered every room. We had the dinner sitting on the floor because I couldn't find the plates yet. Our mattresses lie directly on the bedroom floors, and the curtains hadn't even been on. Still, it felt more like home than anywhere I had ever lived. That first evening, after Nora had fallen asleep, I sat alone on the porch listening to the quiet neighborhood. For the first time in years I allowed myself to believe the hardest chapter of my life was finally over. I had survived loneliness, poverty, single motherhood, impossible work schedules, and years without a family. Surely life would finally allow us some peace. Looking back now, I realize peace rarely lasts forever. A few days after moving into the new house, one of my regular customers casually mentioned that my parents had apparently returned to Millbrook. She spoke the way people in small towns always do, sharing local news without realizing how deeply it could someone listening. My hands froze while wrapping her loaf of bread. The night before, an unfamiliar number from my old hometown had appeared on my phone. I had ignored it without thinking twice. Hearing my customers were suddenly mad that missed call felt heavier than I wanted to admit. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 12 years. To understand why that mattered, you have to go back to the day they erased me from their lives. I was 22 years old and 7 months pregnant when my mother invited me over for what she called a family discussion. I remember actually feeling hopeful. Pregnancy had softened me. I believe becoming grandparents make finally all of tensions between us. On the drive over I even stopped to buy my father's favorite peppermint bark because Christmas was approaching and I wanted things to feel normal again. I carried that little gift into their kitchen believing we might actually become a family again. Instead, I walked into an execution. My father was already seated at the head of the table with a folded document resting in front of him. My mother sat silently beside him, refusing to meet my eyes. Daniele wasn't sitting with them, but he noticed her coat hanging over one of the chairs. She was somewhere inside the house listening. Without greeting me, my father unfolded the paper and began reading. His voice sounded emotionless, almost rehearsed. According to him, because of the choices he had made and the embarrassment he had brought upon the family, they had decided it was best to move forward without me. Every sentence sounded less like a father speaking to his daughter and more like a lawyer reading legal paperwork. He explained that the family home would belong entirely to Daniele. Every savings account would belong to Daniele. Every inheritance they ever planned to leave behind would belong to Daniele. My name would no longer appear anywhere. He wasn't simply being disowned. He was being harassed. He looked toward my mother because he expected her to stop him. Mothers protect their daughters. At least he believed they did. She never looked up. Instead, she quietly whispered that Daniel had told them he had spoken horribly about them and that he didn't even want my own baby connected to the family anymore. He couldn't understand what she was talking about. He had never said anything remotely like that. He opened my mouth to defend myself, but he stopped almost immediately. Watching my mother carefully folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares, he realized something heartbreaking. They had already made their decision before he ever walked through the front door. Nothing he could possibly say would matter. Near the entrance at a black garbage bag already filled with my belongings. That image has never left me. My parents had packed my clothes before inviting me over. Every memory of that afternoon still feels painfully vivid. The unopened tin of peppermint bark sitting forgotten on the kitchen counter. The clock above the stove running 4 minutes fast like it always has since I was a little girl. My father keeping both hands flat on the paper after I finished reading it, unwilling even to stand while his pregnant daughter prepared to live forever. He kept waiting. Waiting for someone to call my name. Waiting for my mother to tell me none of this was real. Waiting for my father to remember he loved me. No one spoke. He picked up the garbage bag, opened the front door, and stepped into cold winter rain. As he reached the sidewalk, he turned back one final time. The living room curtain moved. Someone was standing there watching me walk away. A moment later the curtain slowly closed. For years he convinced himself it had been my mother. He would eventually discover he had been wrong about that too. He rented the cheapest room he could possibly afford above an old laundromat. The building smelled permanently of detergent and damp concrete. The windows leaked colder all winter, and the electrical outlets sparked whenever he plugged in more than one appliance. But it was a cold effort. When Nora was born 2 months later, not a single member of my family came to the hospital. No flowers. No phone calls. No congratulations. The waiting room remained empty from beginning to end. Holding my newborn daughter for the first time, he silently promised her something. No matter how difficult life became, she would never wonder whether she was wanted. That promise became the foundation of everything he built afterward. For the next several years he worked harder than he ever thought possible. During the evenings he cleaned office buildings while Nora slept beside my cleaning cart in a portable carrier. During the mornings he stacked grocery store shelves before sunrise. Every extra dollar went toward rent, diapers, and groceries. Sleep became a luxury he rarely experienced. Some days he couldn't remember whether he'd eaten lunch because survival left no room for comfort. Somewhere during those exhausting years he discovered baking. Bread was inexpensive to make, filled hungry stomachs, and somehow transformed even the saddest apartment into something that felt warm and hopeful. Every loaf he baked reminded me that simple ingredients, when treated with enough patience, could become something beautiful. One morning he wandered into a struggling little bakery on the corner while buying discounted day-old rolls. The owner, an elderly woman named Loretta, watched me carefully as he counted coins from my purse. After a long silence she smiled and asked whether he baked at home. Embarrassed, he admitted he was still learning. Loretta simply nodded. Learning, she told me gently, is usually the most important part. Neither of us knew it then, but that simple conversation was about to change the course of my entire life. Loretta didn't offer me charity, and that's one of the reasons he respected her so deeply. Instead of treating me like someone who needed saving, she treated me like someone capable of succeeding. A few weeks after we first met, she asked if he would help around the bakery during the mornings before my other hopes started. He accepted immediately. At first he only cleaned trash, washed dishes, and packed bread into paper bags, but every quiet morning she patiently showed me something new. She taught me how to knead dough by feeling instead of timing, how to recognize perfectly proof bread with a gentle touch, and how a bakery wasn't really about selling food, It was about creating a place where people felt welcome before they even sat down. The lesson stayed with me far longer than any recipe ever could. As the months passed, Loretta slowly trusted me with more responsibility. Eventually she admitted that her head wasn't what it said to be, and she wanted someone who truly loved the bakery to continue running it after she retired. One rainy afternoon she shocked me by offering to sell me the business for a price no one would ever believe. She asked for only $8,500 and told me I could pay her back little by little whenever the bakery earned enough money. We wrote the agreement on the back of a receipt while Nora slept peacefully beside us. That piece of paper became the first opportunity anyone had ever given me without expecting something in return. Owning the bakery didn't suddenly solve my problems. The first year was brutally difficult. There were weeks when I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Customers were few, equipment constantly broke down, and every unexpected repairs threatened to wipe out what little money I had managed to save. More than once I stood alone inside the kitchen after closing, staring at unpaid bills while trying to convince myself not to give up. I had invested everything into this dream, and failure would have left Nora and me with nowhere to go. One particularly difficult month I fell behind on my rent. I spent countless nights sitting at my tiny kitchen table moving numbers around on scraps of paper, hoping the math would somehow change if I looked at it long enough. No matter how many times I added everything together, I always came up short. I refused to tell Loretta because I didn't want her thinking she had made a mistake by believing in me. Then one morning I opened the bakery and found an envelope beneath the register. Inside was enough money to cover 2 weeks of rent along with a short handwritten note that simply read, "Business is slow this month. Will you catch up later?" She never mentioned it again, and neither did I. The day I finally had enough money, I quietly paid every dollar back. She smiled, accepted the envelope, and immediately changed the subject. That was simply who Loretta was. Slowly, almost without me noticing, the bakery began to grow. A positive newspaper review brought in new customers. A wedding cake order led to birthday parties, anniversaries, and business catering events. Families started stopping by every Saturday morning until our little shop became a part of the community. Years passed, and for the first time in my life I wasn't simply surviving anymore. I was building something that belonged to us. Every improvement inside the bakery felt like another brick replacing the life my parents had taken away. Even while life improved, there was one habit I never abandoned. Every year on my mother's birthday I wrote her a letter. I never filled those letters with accusations or guilt. Instead, I wrote about ordinary moments. I told her when Nora lost her first tooth, when she learned to ride a bicycle without training wheels, when the bakery celebrated another successful year, or when we finally bought new ovens. I included photographs of Nora growing up a year each year and quietly hoped that somewhere my mother might smile if she saw them. Then I sealed the envelope, mailed it, and waited. Nothing ever came back. No replies. No phone calls. No birthday cards. No Christmas wishes. Only silence. For years I convinced myself that silence was their answer. I imagined my parents opening every letter, reading every word, and simply deciding it wasn't worth responding to. It had, but believing that seemed easier than imagining anything else. Every unanswered envelope eventually found its way into an old shoebox hidden inside my closet. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Somehow those letters became proof that I had never stopped trying, even after they had stopped loving me. In 2018 I decided to make one final effort. Instead of an ordinary letter, I mailed a certified envelope containing a recent photograph of Nora along with a short handwritten note that said, "Says your granddaughter to, if you ever want to know her." Because it was certified mail, someone would have to sing before receiving it. 3 weeks later the envelope returned unopened. Across the front was one heartbreaking word stamped in bold letters. Refused. I remember standing beside my mailbox staring at that single word until the letters blurred together through my tears. That moment broke something inside me that never fully healed. I placed the envelope inside the shoebox, closed the lid, and finally accepted that my parents truly wanted nothing to do with either me or my daughter. About a year later my phone buzzed with a message from Daniele. It was the first time she had contacted me since the day I was thrown out of the family. Her text was painfully short. She told me to stop sending letters because I was upsetting our parents and they never wanted to hear from me again. Reading those words hurt, but they also confirmed what I already believed. I deleted the message, put my phone away, and forced myself to move forward. Looking back now, I realize I should have asked one simple question. How did Daniele know exactly what I had been mailing if my parents supposedly never wanted to hear from me? At the time I never questioned it. I was so exhausted from carrying years of rejection to notice the cracks beginning to appear. Life continued peacefully until the afternoon my parents suddenly appeared at the front door of my new house. Nora was spending the day at a friend's home, and I was unpacking moving boxes when three firm knocks echoed through the hallway. I opened the door expecting another. Instead I found my mother and father standing there after 12 years of complete silence. Time had changed them. My father's shoulders were bent, his hair almost completely gray, and one side of his face moved differently than I remembered. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she held her purse. For the briefest moment I almost forgot everything that had happened because all I could see were two elderly people who looked tired. Then my father opened his mouth.
We need to discuss living arrangements, he said. Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Not how have you been. Living arrangements.
Only then did I notice Danielle sitting inside a silver SUV parked across the street.
She never got out.
She simply watched from behind the windshield as though she had already planned exactly how this visit would unfold. I invited my parents inside because I was too shocked to do anything else. My father sat down without waiting to be asked, while my mother slowly walked through the living room examining every wall, every piece of furniture, and every unopened moving box.
She wasn't admiring the house. She was evaluating it.
After several minutes she quietly said something that stunned me. It's the least you can do after everything.
I honestly thought I'd miss her.
My father calmly explained that they intended to move into the spare bedroom because family should always take care of family. Spoke as though this decision had already been made and that remand was for me to agree. Then I looked around the room and confidently told me that this house had been purchased with family money anyway. I stared at him in complete disbelief. Every payment toward this home had come from early mornings inside the bakery, years of overtime, sleepless nights, and endless sacrifice. Not one single dollar had ever come from my parents. Yet my father believed otherwise with absolute certainty. Someone had convinced him this house somehow belonged to the family. As he glanced back toward the street and saw Danielle still washing from inside her vehicle, a terrible feeling settled in my stomach. Something far bigger than an awkward family reunion was happening, and for the first time I realized my sister might have been planning this moment for a very long time. The morning after my parents left, I opened my front door to collect the newspaper and immediately noticed a white envelope tapped to the frame. At first I assumed it was advertising, but the moment I saw the law firm's letterhead my stomach tightened. Inside was a formal notice claiming that I owed restitution for so-called family funds. According to the letter, if I refused to cooperate, legal action would follow. The wording was intentionally intimidating, filled with complicated legal language meant to frighten anyone reading it.
Yet one detail immediately caught my attention. The claim wasn't filed by my parents.
At the bottom of the page, the person authorizing the complaint was Danielle. I stood there reading her name over and over while memories of the previous afternoon replayed in my mind. I suddenly remembered watching her lift her phone to her ear the moment my parents walked back to the SUV. She hadn't simply been waiting outside. She had been directing everything from the beginning. Even though the letter made very little sense, I refused to ignore it. That afternoon I scheduled an appointment with a legal aid attorney and brought every document with me. She carefully read the notice from beginning to end before calmly placing it back on her desk. She explained that there was no legal basis for Danielle's claim because no one could simply demand money from a relative without evidence. The entire letter was designed to pressure me into giving in before ever reaching a courtroom. As relief slowly settled over me, the attorney asked one question that stayed with me long after he left her office. She leaned forward and quietly said, "People usually don't spend money threatening someone unless they are terrified that person might discover something. What do you know that your sister won't expose?" I admitted I had no idea, but the question refused to leave my mind during the drive home. 2 days later my phone rang again.
This teammate was my Aunt Nan, my mother's younger sister.
I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade because, just like me, she had quietly disappeared from the family years earlier. The moment I answered, emotion filled her voice. She apologized for taking so long to contact me and confessed that she had tried several times over the years but never managed to reach me. Then she said something that completely changed the way I viewed everything that had happened. She told me Danielle had blocked her from the family too. According to my aunt, every phone call, every letter, every visit somehow ended before it ever reached my parents. At first the Ash incident seemed like an unfortunate coincidence, but after years of watching the same pattern repeat itself, she became convinced someone was deliberately controlling every line of communication. As our conversation continued, my aunt revealed detail after detail that made my heart race. She explained that my father had suffered a stroke several years earlier. It pasn't severe no to live in bedridden, but it affected his memory and forced him to rely heavily on Daniele. She gradually took complete control of their finances, their phones, their paperwork, and eventually every decision they made. She handled their bank accounts, organized their appointments, collected their mail, and became the person through whom every message passed. My aunt believed my parents weren't avoiding me because they hated me anymore. They simply never knew I'd been trying to reach them. Then came the revelation that completely shattered everything I believed for 12 years. My aunt told me my parents no longer owned the family home. That single sentence left me speechless. After ending the call, I immediately searched the county property records online. Within minutes I found the official documents. The house my parents had proudly signed over to Daniele had been sold years earlier for $268,000. Daniele had received the money. Yet despite selling the property, my parents were now living in a modest rental home and desperately searching for somewhere else to stay. The numbers simply didn't add up. If the house had sold for that amount, where had every dollar gone? Determined to understand the truth, I spent the next day quietly gathering information. Piece by piece, an ugly picture emerged. There had been a large home equity loan taken against the property years before it was sold. Their retirement savings had slowly disappeared through dozens of withdrawals. Every financial decision pointed toward one person. Daniela hadn't been sacrificing her life to care for our parents. She had been spending theirs. By the time the money was gone, she needed someone else to carry the responsibility of looking after them. That someone was me. As I sat at my kitchen table staring at those numbers, another realization struck even harder. I walked into my bedroom, pulled the old shoebox from the closet, and carefully opened it. One by one I removed every birthday card, every Christmas letter, every photograph of Nora, and finally the certified envelope stamped refused. This time I examined it more closely than ever had before. Next to the signature acknowledging delivery were initials that suddenly looked painfully familiar. They weren't my mother's handwriting. They belonged to Daniele. She had signed for the letter herself. She had returned it without ever allowing my parents to see it. For 7 years I believed my own mother had rejected a photograph of her granddaughter. The truth was even worse. My mother had probably never known the envelope existed. Every birthday card, every family update, every attempt to reconnect had likely ended in Daniele's hands before disappearing forever. She had spent 12 years convincing me my parents hated me while simultaneously convincing them I wanted nothing to do with them. We had both been living inside a lie carefully maintained by the same person. A few days later word spread through the family that Daniele wanted everyone together for a meeting about our parents' future. She planned to gather relatives, explain how difficult caring for them had become, and publicly pressure me into taking them into my home. She expected the entire family to watch while either accepted responsibility or looked heartless by refusing. I agreed to attend, but before leaving the house I placed the shoebox into a canvas bag and carried it with me. The meeting took place in the fellowship hall behind the church where my family had worshipped throughout my childhood. Folding chairs filled the room while relatives quietly greeted one another over coffee. Daniele stood confidently near the front like someone preparing to give an important speech. My parents sat nearby looking tired and confused. When he entered, Daniele smiled politely, certain everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. She began describing the sacrifices she had supposedly made during the past decade. She spoke about endless doctor appointments, financial stress, sleepless nights, and the emotional burden of caring for her parents completely alone. Several relatives nodded sympathetically. Then, exactly as expected, she turned toward me and announced that because I owned a successful business and a comfortable home, it was finally time for me to do my share. The entire room looked at me. Instead of arguing, I calmly asked a single question. You've sacrificed everything for Mom and Dad. She answered without hesitation. Yes. I reached into my canvas bag, removed the property records, and placed them on the table. Then perhaps you can explain what happened to the $268,000 from selling their house. The room instantly fell silent. Before she recovered, I placed another document beside the first. And maybe explain the home equity loan. Then came another. And their retirement savings. Every sheet of paper landed on the table like another crack spreading through the stories she had spent years building. Relatives who had been nodding only moments earlier leaned forward to read the documents for themselves. Face slowly changed from sympathy to confusion. Finally, he lifted the shoebox onto the table. He explained that inside were 12 years of unanswered letters, birthday cards, family photographs, and one certified envelope he had always believed my mother refused to accept. He carefully held up the envelope so everyone could see the signature beside the word refused. Then he quietly said the words that changed everything. My mother never rejected this letter. Danielle signed for it herself.
My mother's face turned pale.
She stared at the envelope before looking directly at Danielle. You told us she never wrote. Those 6 words carried more weight than any speech she could have prepared. My father slowly lowered his head while my mother began crying. Danielle looked around the room searching desperately for someone willing to defend her, but no one spoke. The evidence sitting on the table answered every question before anyone could ask it. For the first time in 12 years, my parents understood that he had never abandoned them. And for the first time in 12 years, he understood they had never seen a single attempt he made to come home. He didn't stay to watch the arguments begin. There was nothing left for me to prove. He quietly picked up the shoebox, left the documents behind for everyone else to examine, and walked toward the exit.
Halfway across the church parking lot, he heard someone call my name. It was my mother.
The first time she had spoken my name in 12 years. She reached me with tears running down her face and apologized over and over, unable to find enough words to repair everything that had been broken. He listened, but he also knew that an apology, no matter how sincere, could never erase the years Nora and he had spent alone. Eventually he helped my parents find a small senior apartment where they could live safely, but he never invited them into my home. Forgiveness did not require removing every boundary he had spent years building. Today life is quieter. The bakery still opens before sunrise every morning, and the smell of fresh bread still feels there before the rest of the town wakes up. Nora still laughs behind the counter while helping customers choose their favorite pastries. Sometimes my parents visit like ordinary customers. They buy a few muffins, sit quietly by the window, and leave without asking for anything. Our relationship shop is still healing, but it moves at a pace that protects the life he built rather than threatening it. The old shoebox still exists, although it no longer sits within easy reach. It rests on the highest shelf in my kitchen, where it belongs. For years he believed it contained proof that he wasn't worth loving. Now he understands it contains proof of something entirely different. It reminds me that he never stopped reaching out, never stopped choosing kindness, and never allowed someone else's lies to define the woman he became. My worth was never determined by whether other people believed those lies. It was determined by the life he built after walking away from that bus stop in the rain with nothing except hope and the teeny heartbeat of the daughter who gave me the strength to keep going.